This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
X-Zone Nation, welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone Radio Show coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Toll-free worldwide, 1-800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. X-Zone Nation, my guest this hour is Andy Thomas. And we're going to be talking about the Truth Agenda, making sense of unexplained mysteries, global cover-ups, and 2012 predictions. Andy Thomas is one of England's most prolific authors and lecturers on unexplained mysteries and speaks widely in the UK and abroad. Andy is an author of 7 books exploring the unexplained, including the acclaimed Vital Signs, A Complete Guide to the Crop Circle Mystery, which was published in 1998 and then revised in 2002, which has been described by many as the definitive guide to the subject, and was also nominated for Kindred Spirits Magazine's 2002 Best Book Award. Andy's other books include Field of Mystery, The Crop Circle Phenomenon in Sussex, going back to 1996, Quest for Contact, A True Story of Crop Circle Psychics and UFOs in 1997 with Paul Burra. Swirled Harvest, Views from the Crop Circle Front Line in 2003, and Oneness of Mind, The Power of Collective Thought and Signs of Our Times in 2003. And finally, an Introduction to Crop Circles in 2004. Andy's latest and most major investigation into the mystery realms, the Truth Agenda, making sense of unexplained mysteries, global cover-ups, and 2012 prophecies, was first published in 2009. His website is truthagenda.org. And Andy Thomas, welcome back to the X-Zone. How have you been, my friend?
Oh, very busy, but it's a pleasure to be back. Thank you.
Always great having you here with us in the X-Zone. Before we get talking about the paranormal things that go bump in the night, crop circles, UFOs, and so on, you live in the United Kingdom, and as everyone knows who's listening to the show, we saw it on CNN, and the rest of the world watched as the UK was in riots. What was it like actually living where these riots were going on?
Well, I mean, the first thing, obviously, to say is these only happened in certain places, largely areas of some of the more built-up cities. So, I mean, anybody living sort of in a village or a town in the country wouldn't have seen any of this. But certainly for those that were in the areas, it was very frightening. And I don't think entirely unexpected, but I think it certainly built up far more quickly than anybody was expecting. And of course, people have been predicting for quite some time that there might be attempts to stir people up to rebellion, in the hope, of course, that you can then bring in laws which are more than you really need to stop it. And, fear that this was what we were seeing here on the streets of Britain. And of course, we very much hope that this is going to work out a different way. But it certainly has been very unsettling over the last few weeks, as you would have seen on the TV.
Sure. Now, Andy, we've got about a minute left before we go to commercial break, but as the author of The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies, were you expecting this to happen?
Well, I mean, what is interesting when you look at the Truth Agenda now, which I revised only just a few months ago, there's actually quite a lot in the book which anticipates what has happened and what is now happening. And that doesn't make me feel very good, because many people feel that the public have been stirred into a state where they have no other voice other than to become rebellious and break the law. And this is not a good state of affairs, and yet many people have seen it coming for quite some time. And it certainly, I think it took people by surprise. A lot of people were expecting it next year, but of course the big fear is that this is a rehearsal for what's going to happen with the Olympics.
Let's talk about next year when we come back from this 2-minute break. Andy Thomas is our special guest. www.truthagenda.org. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. We'll be back in 2. Don't go away.
This is Johanna Carroll, host of Dialogue with Divinity on the X Zone Broadcast Network. While walking along Kaanapali Beach in Maui this past year, I kept discovering all these shells and coral in the shape of hearts. My dialogue with Divinity was very simple. Do you want me to do a retreat to heal people's hearts in Maui next year? And of course, the answer was yes. As a master spiritual teacher, I am offering you a neat retreat called Rise, May 8th through the 12th, 2017, and the chance of a lifetime to rest at a 5-star resort for 5 days and experience a spiritual renewal of your heart and soul. Kaanapali is one of the top 5 beaches in the world. This stunning resort has undergone a $40 million renovation. I walked the entire property, checked out the room choices on your behalf, and I must say it is stunning. Our conference room faces the ocean with sliding glass doors. Maui is known as Mother Maui because it is a soft, gentle, healing energy. In the embrace of Mother Maui, you will feel yourself rising from the limitations of an ordinary life to an extraordinary journey of peace, bliss, and harmony. A greater sense of clarity. Our Rise retreat ignites renewal in the sacred elements of air, water, earth, fire, and wind. There's plenty of free time to enjoy all that Maui has to offer. A small deposit is required now to reserve your space, as this retreat, it will sell out. For more details, please go to johannacarroll.com and register today. Aloha, and I'll see you in mystical Maui.
Exonation. Andy Thomas is my guest. He's the author of The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies. His website is truthagenda.org. Andy, before we went to the break, you made a reference towards the year to come, 2012. What do you see as what's really going to happen in 2012 compared to what a lot of people are saying, the end of the world, the end of the Mayan calendar, the beginning of the Book of Revelations? What is the truth about 2012?
Well, I mean, I think the problem that we have at the moment is that there are so many different opinions, and people sort of shout louder and louder to make their opinions heard, but that doesn't necessarily make them correct. I think we've got 2 things to look at. There is the whole sense of social shift and things that might actually happen. That this is maybe what we've been seeing on the streets of Britain, where there's a change in the way people respond to things. But of course, you also have big political shifts and all of this.
That's right.
But on top of that, you have the fear of astronomical, cosmological change, whether it be the arrival of comets or rogue planets or asteroids, or whether we are, as many people think, I think with very good reason, we're dealing with the sun about to be, shall we say, far more active than we have known. Even NASA is putting out warnings about solar flares. So when you put all of these things together, of course, it is a very apocalyptic scenario. Now, the reality is, of course, nobody knows for sure how this is going to pan out. But a lot of this is coming together. And it is interesting to see that some of what people have been talking about for a long time does seem to be gelling together. Even if it is being self-created, there's certainly a sense that there is something gathering pace. And I think everybody feels it, even people that don't really know much about the 2012 prophecies, even they're saying it just feels like something is changing. And certainly we feel that very much over here in England.
Well, you can certainly see it around the rest of the world as well, in Syria, in Yemen, in Egypt. Something definitely is going on, Andy. And just getting away from 2012 for a few minutes, in your book, The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies, in your opinion, Andy, what are some of the major global cover-ups?
Well, I mean, of course, I don't think we could not mention the big one which is being discussed now, which is, of course, 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here with the 10th anniversary upon us, and certainly over here, we are quite rightly seeing a lot of commemoration and many television programs, but what's coming with it also is very much a sense of trying to crush the alternative views on 9/11. And of course, I mean, I believe if you look at recent polls, I think it's 50% or thereabouts of the world's population doesn't believe the official story of 9/11. So one has to assume that the powers that be are very concerned about this. And just last night on the BBC, they ran another television program effectively debunking all the 9/11 conspiracy theories, and yet not addressing any of the real issues. It was distraction. It was the classic straw man technique. And we're getting a lot of this, and there's more programs due to come. So, you know, I think there's no question of all cover-ups. Whatever you think the reality of 9/11 was, we're certainly not being allowed to have the discussion that really needs to be had, and the inquiries that really need to be had if we're going to ever put this one to bed. So 10 years on, of course, it's all coming back up again, and I think the next few weeks, there's going to be an awful lot of strife between the two camps. But certainly the biggest cover-up of all, I do believe, is 9/11.
What do you think happened?
Well, I don't think that there's many people in the 9/11 truth world who would argue the point that somewhere down the line, what David Ray Griffin calls a small criminal cabal, and maybe that's the way to put them. Now, whether you call them the New World Order or something else is maybe not so important, but there clearly were people with links to Western intelligences that played a role in making those attacks as successful as they were.
Yeah, I think one of them was George Bush himself.
That's an interesting argument because, of course, when you see the now famous film, Michael Moore's film made it very famous, of Bush sitting in the classroom reading the story about the pet goat, it does seem when he is told, when I think you see Andrew Card walks in and he whispers into his ear, it looks to many people like he is genuinely puzzled as to what's going on. And one viewpoint is that he didn't know what was going on, was then packed off onto Air Force One, and that maybe there was an implicit threat to his safety if he then didn't go along with the conspiracy that he would have then been made party to later in the day. Because when you then see Bush later on that evening, he's taken on quite a different demeanor. And whereas in the morning, he just seems to be unable to act appropriately. It looks like he doesn't really know what's going on. By the evening, that's changed. And many people feel that whoever this elite were who were pulling this off had sat down and said, Mr. President, we need to speak to you. And, at the end of the day, he really probably had to go with it to ensure his own safety. So whether it's as straightforward as Mr. Bush being involved, there are many people that don't believe he directly was, but that he certainly would have been informed about it later on. The thing is, we can't be sure of exactly who was involved. Of course, there are people who, have named names, and they may well be right, they may well be wrong. But what I think is very urgent is to just make the British public, the American public, and the global public aware that there is a case to be answered. And the only way you can do that is to very sensibly and rationally discuss the evidence. But unfortunately, certainly in the British media, we're not allowed to have a sensible discussion. But then that's why the truth movement over here is trying to arrange events, and some of the smaller TV channels try to put on programs to balance this, because there is a great feeling of propaganda here at the moment, trying to distract away from the real issues.
When I see George Bush in that classroom and somebody leans over and whispers in his ear, I don't know, if I was you, if I was the president of the United States and I had just been told that the Twin Towers had been flown into and given the circumstances surrounding the events, I would not sit there, continue reading a story. I would excuse myself and leave.
Well, yes. I mean, this is one of the other puzzles, which is that even if you presume that maybe he did know exactly what was going on, he still did not act appropriately. And whichever way you look at it, I think you're seeing a man there who really was not experienced enough to know how to deal with the situation properly. And of course, one of the other mysteries is, given that there were aeroplanes on their way to different places, and who knows where they were going to crash next, the presence of George Bush at the school where he was had been widely televised. Now, you would have thought the first thing they would have wanted to have done was get him out of there.
Exactly.
Because, of course, he was making the school a target. Now, the fact that that didn't happen has to make you think, well, that's because somebody knew that the school was not going to be a target. And this, of course, raises further suspicions.
You know, I've spoken to people on this show and off-air, first responders within the buildings, who, beyond a shadow of a doubt, heard explosions. And video analysts who watch the video, who've done every conceivable test to the video footage, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, that was a controlled demolition.
Well, I mean, this is what's so extraordinary, and it makes me very sad to have to name the BBC again, but on the BBC website yesterday, there's a list of sort of 9/11 conspiracy myths, and one by one it debunks them, or attempts to. And its answer for why there couldn't have been any explosives in the building, which, as you say, many people reported, is, quote, that there is no evidence for explosives in the building, end quote. And that is such an outrageously crass thing to say when there are so many people, as you've said, credible eyewitnesses, firemen, rescue workers, janitors, who witnessed these explosions. And there is film which makes it more than clear that what you're seeing is some kind of controlled demolition technique. However, this strategy that's being employed is basically not to engage with the evidence. If there is evidence that's strong, they just ignore it. They pretend it's not there. Just, indeed, as the official 9/11 Commission report did some years back, which, if it met anything that was too awkward to answer, simply pretended it hadn't happened. And this is what you're always up against, is that, of course, if you don't think for yourself, if you don't have the time to explore these issues for yourself, you could be distracted, you could be convinced by these sort of straw man theories, as they call them. But if you just take the time, even for 5 minutes, to start to look at the evidence, you begin to realize you are being lied to, which is, of course, still an upsetting thing. Although we're getting used to it, it doesn't make it right.
Yesterday, I had the opportunity of speaking to a very high-ranking U.S. Army officer who is now retired. And we were talking about 9/11. And he said unequivocally that the Navy SEALs could have easily took control of bin Laden and brought him to justice alive. But it apparently turned into a kill operation because bin Laden served as a threat to what really happened in 9/11.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because on one level, you would imagine he would have been the most key witness they could ever put in a stand in a court. bin Laden would have been the ultimate prize. But equally, this is where you have to wonder that they did not want him giving evidence, because, of course, this would have exposed a lot of things that we have to presume the authorities don't want exposed. So, therefore, the last thing they could do was bring him back alive. But, of course, this raises the question of whether or not it even was bin Laden that died a few weeks back.
All right, let's talk about that when we come back from this commercial break with our news. Andy Thomas, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Always a great pleasure talking to you. Exonation, Andy Thomas is our guest. His new book, The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies. His website, truthagenda.org. And Andy Thomas and I will return on the other side of this commercial break, right here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell. For more information on the Body, Soul, and Spirit Expo, www.bodysoulspiritexpo.com. We'll be back. Don't go away.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Exonation, Andy Thomas is my special guest. He's the author of a great book entitled The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies. Andy's website is www.truthagenda.org. Andy, before we went to the commercial break, we were talking about bin Laden and if he had really been caught. And you know, there's so many people out there that believe that the real bin Laden or bin Laden is still alive, and that the reason why the United States does not want to release those photos and that footage of him at his execution is actually because he's not dead.
Well, or that he in fact died a long time ago, because there are many sources that reported that bin Laden actually died as long ago as 2001, 2002, and very probably of kidney failure. Now, what is interesting here is the people who have said this are actually quite high-ranking. For instance, the Indian politician Benazir Bhutto actually stated on television that bin Laden had died in this way. Mysteriously, she was dead herself just a few weeks later. Now, I'm not saying that was directly related, but there are some people that believe that it might have played a part. So, in other words, there are people in quite high places who have believed he's been gone for a long time, which means that if that is true, who on earth was it that they did shoot?
If there was anyone there at all.
Well, I suspect there possibly was from the reports that have been, that have come back to us, but who it was is another matter. The thing that strikes me, and I think a lot of people are concerned about, however, is that even if you take it at face value, let's assume that it was bin Laden that they assassinated just recently, the way it was handled was appalling.
Yes.
I mean, number one, they are doing this in our name. and yet they don't have the decency to show what was done in our name. They won't show the film, they won't show the photo. Oh, and they put his body in the sea as well, so that nobody can see it. Now, these things are guaranteed to stir up conspiracy theories. I mean, it's absolutely a guarantee that people will not be happy. And what is interesting, just talking to people over here, just as a few years ago when Dr. David Kelly, who of course went public saying there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, just as when he died, it was quite hard to find anybody who believed it really had been suicide. Most people felt that it was murder. Again, the more you talk to people over here, no matter what the media might report, most people doubt the story of the bin Laden assassination. There were so many things that we've not heard enough about. One of the helicopters allegedly crashed or was shot down on the night of the raid. And what is interesting, there's also information beginning to come through that the Chinook helicopter that was lost just a few weeks ago over, I think it was Afghanistan or Pakistan,
that's right, yeah.
that allegedly on board were some of the key people who were involved with this operation, who, of course, now being dead, will never be able to discuss it. So the more you look, the more suspicious this whole enterprise becomes. And, of course, many people have considered that bin Laden was a very useful enemy to have there. If he did die a long time ago, well, it wouldn't help anybody to say that. And this suited, it must be said, both the West and Al-Qaeda, whoever they may really be, because, of course, it suited them to also have this big, scary leader in the shadows. But whether this had any level of reality really is highly open to question. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens to Colonel Gaddafi in the next few weeks, because some people are beginning to wonder, is Gaddafi going to be the next bin Laden, this mystery enemy always on the run, which, of course, they can use to justify more incursions and more invasions. So that's going to be one worth watching, very much so.
I often wonder, and I've asked this question on air and off air to friends and associates, what would happen if one of these countries was to invade the United States as the United States is invading all these different countries?
Well, yes, I don't suppose they would be very happy about it.
No.
I mean, I think that the problem that we have in Libya is that the West clearly became involved before it was clear where people's loyalties really lay. I mean, I think in Egypt it was pretty clear that, there was a mass uprising plainly against Mubarak. In Libya, I don't think it was so clear-cut. And by getting involved with rebels who, to be truthful, nobody really knows who they stand for, it smacked of a manipulation really from the start. And you have to ask, well, if they were willing to take action in Libya, why were they not willing to take action in, say, Bahrain or any other country in the world, which, of course, has leaders that are questionable? So it seemed very, very selective. And, of course, the usual things, oil, money, power, probably lie more behind the decisions than anything humanitarian. And, of course, that's not to say that Gaddafi was a good man. I'm sure that, he was yet another leader we could all do without. But to support rebels that we do not really understand, I think is a questionable action. So it's just yet a further sort of war, which we are told is necessary, and yet seems to just lead us further and further into basically having more and more incursions into other people's territory. And it makes people feel very uncomfortable because, of course, some see these as the steps to the ubiquitous New World Order.
Yeah. You just look over the last couple of years. You've got Saddam Hussein, you've got Omar Gaddafi, you've got bin Laden. It seems that, if you don't give us what we want, we're just going to cause problems in your country. You're going to get annihilated, and we're going to get what we want anyway.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very good way of keeping people in their place, because this is now an implicit threat that anybody that steps out of line against the West, and sadly America in particular, it's like, well, this is what you're going to get.
But that's not the way that America wants to come across. Well, not the people of America. They don't want to come across as the bad guys, and yet, whenever there's an invasion of a country, or helping what we classify to be the bad guys out, this just digs a hole a little bit deeper for America to get into, and it's certainly starting to show within the financial community.
It does. Well, I mean, I think one of the sad things is that, of course, yes, people often speak a little bit glibly about, the Americans, as if what the administration is doing represents everybody. Well, of course it doesn't. There are many people who are deeply uncomfortable with what's going on, and just the same over here in Britain. And yeah, it is very interesting. I mean, if you look at the British ministers who voted for the action in Libya, for instance, I believe that the polls in Britain were showing something like only 30% of people on the streets supported action in Libya. And yet, of the MPs who voted, I think something like 90% voted for the action. Now, that is a huge disparity between what the people want and what the decisions being made are, because these people in Parliament are not representing what people really believe. So I think this is true in many of the countries around the world, that at the end of the day, decisions are being made by people who have their own interests at heart, certainly not ours. But when we hold a nation responsible for something, of course, really it's not. It's a small collection of people at the top who, of course, they manage to lull their population either into apathy or through fear. People go along with things that they don't really believe in their hearts. And I think we're getting a real sense of that now. And maybe one of the things about 2012 is that people are no longer sitting still for things in quite the same way. They are beginning to question more. They are beginning to challenge more. And so when they are misled, they ask for more evidence. And, of course, the danger of that is that the powers that be might then try to force the hand of their own people more, with more lies, more threats, whether it be about weapons of mass destruction or whatever it may be. And also by sheer propaganda. I mean, it's very interesting that, again, over here, very widely broadcast on television was, and I think this was just last week, was footage purporting to be the Libyans celebrating in Green Square in Tripoli.
Yes.
Until somebody pointed out that, in fact, the flags being waved were flags of India, not Libya.
Oh my
and
God.
It turned out that the footage is from a completely different demonstration in India some time back. And yet this was openly broadcast purporting to be Tripoli. So we are being clearly lied to in very, very obvious and slightly scary ways. So this is the problem. But people are noticing. You can't get away with this stuff in the same way anymore, because after things like the Iraq War, people are aware, which is very hopeful. I mean, this offers some optimism, because at least they are not being as easily led as maybe once they would have been.
Let me ask you this. Would it be such a bad thing if the New World Order were to take over?
Well, this is an interesting point, because many people have said, well, do we really know who these people are? Maybe they have good intentions behind it all. And okay, I mean, listen, there have been some very famous philosophers and thinkers in the past who've been generally respected. H.G. Wells, for instance, Bertrand Russell, who have openly advocated a world government. But the problem that we have is that although in principle that might work if we were governed by, angels, the problem is that the people that seem to be trying to put this program together seem to be doing it with very old-fashioned, unpleasant techniques, underhand, not straightforward or honest, and by people that seem to want a lot of power. Now, that is no world government that can ever work. Anything that is going to operate by deception and oppression cannot work. The only way a new world order really worth its salt could work would be if it was coming from a very centered, enlightened place. And sadly, I don't think we see any evidence yet that the people who are trying to arrange these things are anywhere close to that state of being. And that is why it cannot work in this present time.
Is what is going on throughout Europe right now within the European Union, the financial disaster that a number of countries are finding themselves in, and the rise of Germany, an indication on what it would be like with a one world order?
Well, I mean, clearly many people have seen the whole EU project as a step towards trying to make this work. Now, you could argue that it's therefore not worked very well because, of course, the euro financially is in deep crisis at the moment. Some are saying that it cannot survive, or certainly not without being split into a two-tier Europe. with basically two separate currencies. But of course that would then seem to play against the idea that world government could work. But there is another viewpoint on that, which is that it has to actually be shown to fail, because that way then they can dismantle the euro, which the theory runs people in the background always knew wouldn't work in the long run. And then you replace it with a currency that's far more global and has more links to other proposed global currencies. And of course we have a similar situation with the American dollar, where again there have long, as I'm sure you will know, been people talking that there is a plan to merge the American economy with Canada
and then Mexico, sure, the euro,
and produce the Amero or whatever it would wind up.
The Amero, that's right.
And of course, the dollar itself is looking very shaky. So some people think that, the crisis in the dollar, the crisis in the euro, is in fact almost designed for everything to collapse at an appropriate time, so that then a more unified world currency can be proposed. And it is very interesting in Europe. A lot of the TV coverage recently, we've heard politicians saying the reason the euro is not working is because you've got too many countries fighting for their own sovereignty, and not actually working in a unified way for the euro. And they're saying, what we need is more political unification. So, it's the old problem, reaction, solution thing that, of course, David Icke talks about. It's as if we've been presented with a problem whereby they then produce the solution, which is more unity. So although it looks like the EU project is getting shaky and maybe failing, it might be that that's part of the trick, because then you offer the solution, which is even more unification coming through the back door, if you wish. So this is, I think, a lot of what we're seeing at the moment. And people sense it. I think they feel very uncomfortable because they know in their heart of hearts they are not being told the whole truth about what is going on. That sooner or later you can't go on forever like that. And this is where I think people are beginning to react against it.
Stand by, my friend. You and I have to take our final break. Thanks very much for joining us, Andy. It's always great having you here in the X Zone. X Zone Nation, our special guest this hour is Andy Thomas. We're talking about his new book, The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies. His website is truthagenda.org. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as we do our wrap-up for tonight from here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
In over 36 years in law enforcement, I've learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, extraterrestrials, and UFOs, how we gather that evidence of their existence, preserve that same evidence, and present it to a court of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Come with me on a journey that seeks to prove with undisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Join me, Larry Lawson, host of the Paranormal Stakeout, coming to the X Zone Broadcast Network. Check out the broadcast schedule for Paranormal Stakeout with yours truly, Larry Lawson, at www.xzbn.net. For more information about me, my travels, and my team, check out our website at www.paranormalfbi.com or join us on Facebook at Florida Bureau of Paranormal.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
You're listening to the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Where does the time go when you're having fun? Exonation, I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing us to be part of your day or night, no matter where you are in this great big world. Thank you, and of course to all our affiliates worldwide, guys, you make it all happen. Andy Thomas is my special guest this hour. We've been talking about Andy's new book, The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies. His website is truthagenda.org. Andy, what are some of the other global cover-ups that you cover in your book?
Well, I mean, obviously, where do you start? There are so many of them. I mean, one of the interesting ones to always talk about is the classic NASA moon photograph.
Yeah.
Because what is interesting is, of course, it's one of the most best-known conspiracy theories. It's also one of the most laughed at. I mean, you know, this is widely ridiculed in the press. But what is interesting is it's a good way of showing people there is a halfway house. Because when you do look at some of the images, you can categorically show that they cannot possibly have been taken in natural light
That's
on
right.
the moon.
Yeah.
Now, we don't really have the time to go into the ins and outs of this here, but there's a general point to make, which, of course, doesn't prove they didn't go to the moon. But there are certainly some photographs where you can clearly see they have been faked. There's a classic photograph of Michael Collins, for instance, doing a spacewalk. And yet somebody later on found the original photograph, which is in fact Michael Collins in a test aeroplane. And all somebody has done is literally cut around the shape of his body and stick him on a black background and put the photo out purporting to show him in space. So when you get fakes that are that poor, of course you then have to wonder about the entire record of the moon landings.
Yeah.
Now, I certainly hope that we did go to the moon. But I have to concede that some of the images cannot be real. So that's where you get an interesting crossover. And in the Truth Agenda, I deliberately use that as an example of something we're all familiar with. We're all familiar with the moon landings and, of course, the famous stories about it. But when you can make people realize that they've not been told the whole truth about it, which I think you can very easily demonstrate, whatever your ultimate opinion is, that shakes people. And, of course, it makes them more open to considering other strange things that are going on in the world, whether it be to do with UFOs or crop circles or political mysteries like 9/11, like we've talked about. So this is where what I'm trying to do with the book and with the lectures that, of course, I regularly give, is to draw the threads together for people and make them see that there is a recurring pattern in the world here. We are almost never told the whole truth about what's going on, and we either have a stupid or a manipulated media, one or the other, who of course are dancing to the tune of powers that be, who frankly do not have our interests at heart. And that's, you know, the frank reality. But I don't believe that can go on forever. And I do end the book on a very optimistic note about what we can do.
Andy, I hate to do this, buddy, but we've run out of time for tonight. Andy Thomas will be back with us in the future Exonation. Andy, take care of yourself. Keep up the great work, buddy. And for more information on Andy Thomas, visit his website, truthagenda.org. Until tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, Exonation, take care. Speak to you